What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my review after 100% for Beast of Reincarnation, which gives us a rare glimpse at Game Freak doing something besides Pokemon, which to be fair isn't the first time, but it's been a while. Before we dive into all of that, to get my usual stuff out of the way, I review games after 100% all the time to set me apart from other reviewers on the platform, and while that does include the achievements, it also includes a lot more than that. There's a video link below that covers everything I go over, and my Steam profile is public and linked down below as well. And in the case of Beast of Reincarnation, you are seeing this shortly after the game itself released, technically due to time zones it released last night, which is also when the actual review embargo lifted, but that time didn't really work for me. I'm able to, of course, do this because I received a review key from a PR company working on behalf of Game Freak. As a 100% experience, honestly pretty straightforward. You'll have to do 2 runs of it because of some New Game Plus stuff you'll need to see, but beyond that, relatively straightforward if you've played these types of games before. And I'm actually pretty sure all the guides and stuff will be up for it pretty much immediately because, again, it just wasn't that crazy. Either way, I've had this in my hands for roughly the past 10 days or so, and thus let's actually get into it. Now, this game was a bit of an interesting experience for a variety of reasons. For starters, it was interesting just to see Game Freak do some non-Pokemon stuff, yes, and in that sense, like specifically about that, I do think the more you play this, I think you can actually feel some of Game Freak's design philosophy shine through in that regard. Like there's stuff with your pet or companion Ku that definitely feels very Pokemon-esque. I actually joked about that a bit before the game itself released, but it turned out to be pretty on point. And while the game does, I feel like, have enjoyable combat and traversal, it unfortunately also has a fair few problems. I'm going to detail a significant issue I had with the game crashing, but even beyond that, I think there's issues with like the enemy variety. You'll fight a lot of the same enemies just over and over and over again. That repetition also bleeds through into the environments. There's really not a lot of diversity in the areas you will be wandering through and exploring, and while the story gets interesting, it takes a pretty long time to get there. And all told, I would mostly say this game was fine. Seems like the kind of thing you would pick up during the winter sale. But from there, let's dig a little deeper into it, starting with the technical state. So I mentioned I had an issue with crashing. And while that is true, it was also very specific. I had an issue with this game crashing during cutscenes. It ran great otherwise, but, once we would get to a story cutscene, there was a significant chance it just wouldn't actually play and the game would crash and I'd have to, try to restart it. Sometimes after this would happen, the game would have trouble restarting for some reason, like it would just black screen on me. And while I was never able to fix this completely, the cinematics themselves do have 2 options: an unlimited frame rate that matches your hardware, and then a cinematic option for the cutscenes, which are then kind of locked to 24 FPS. Turning that on helped with this issue, like it crashed less, but it did not stop it entirely, and that was by far the most annoying issue. It crashed a lot of times. I actually stopped counting after a certain point, but it was too much. Otherwise, though, playing this on PC, it was mostly okay. I was able to rebind a couple of odd keys here and there, but the crashing was really the big issue. Next, let's move on to difficulty and New Game Plus. So this game is, I would say, verging on being a Souls-like. Like, it's not entirely there, but you can kind of definitely see the DNA from those games present. I'm kind of on the fence about actually calling it one myself, but as a result of that, difficulty is going to be a bit of a hot-button issue, but like a lot of games, it's mostly hard in the beginning. And you do actually have some difficulty options regardless, which are essentially, at first, easy, normal, and hard. Now, the main thing these seem to do is decide how much damage you take from enemies, and on normal, when you first start the game, that's a not insignificant amount of damage. However, you do get to a point where you kind of just get past that, and then the game becomes much, much easier, even when New Game Plus rolls around and you unlock Reincarnation difficulty. This is your New Game Plus difficulty that starts scaling up enemy attack as you move through them, but the catch is the enemies themselves don't level up or get stronger outside of that increased attack, which means that they still have the same amount of health, and you will have gotten drastically stronger. And so it's not that bad to run through the game once, get much, much stronger, and then plow through New Game Plus, which is technically harder, but because you unlock some just incredible abilities by beating the game once, I was able to just kind of destroy New Game Plus without much of a challenge at all, despite it being a harder difficulty. And if that wasn't enough, I noticed a place late in the game where you could actually grind really, really quickly, just a good spot to rest and respawn enemies, kill everything, rest, respawn, etc. So that's also an option. But long story short, the game can be difficult in the beginning, but once you get over that sort of initial difficulty bump, the rest of it honestly wasn't that bad. which then brings me to the story and my thoughts on it. So, broadly, I will say that the story gets good, but it takes a long time to get there, and there's a lot of incredibly long, unskippable cutscenes, which also fed into the crashing issue that I mentioned, and so it can just be a bit of a slog to get to the good parts, but by the end of the story, I was finally invested, but it admittedly just takes way too long to get there. Now, I don't want to spoil this game. It has barely released, and so I'm obviously going to try to avoid that, but I still want to give people the basic setup. So, the game is set in a post-apocalyptic Japan. Humanity's only hope is our main character, Emma. She has been shunned by what is left of society because she is what is known as blight-stained. The post-apocalypse was seemingly caused by this blight, which turns living things into monstrosities known as malefacts. The blight-stained, like Emma here, are used to fight the malefacts because they seem to be immune to the actual effects of the blight, at least partially. All of this comes to a bit of a head when it turns out the Beast of Reincarnation is coming, which seems to be an entity that resurrects every 100 years or so, no matter how many times it's killed, which then goes on to continue spreading the blight and causing this greater problem at large. And so our job as Emma is to travel through a whole bunch of different zones via our sort of mobile home base that has legs and walks around, as we try to seek out and destroy the larger malefacts known as Nushi and absorb all of their blight to make ourselves stronger to face the Beast of Reincarnation. As you would probably expect, yes, there is more to it than that, and again, I don't think the story starts really getting good until you get towards the end of it. But it simply takes too long to get there, and I think the game is going to lose most people long before it gets good. And even with that in mind, mostly I just think the story's okay. It's not going to wow you, I don't think it's revolutionary, but it's alright. That then brings us to progression systems. What does that look like for this game? Not too bad overall, so you and your animal companion, Ku, are going to be leveling up, earning skill points, using some equipment in the form of like various abilities in the case of Ku, and then also actual equipment for you, but let's take it one thing at a time. As you kill enemies, you will gain experience. You can spend that experience on increasing your attributes. There are 3 of them. This will increase, of course, secondary stats to make you stronger, which is all well and good. As you kill enemies in particular, you gain skill points. That is to say, every time you kill an enemy, you gain a skill point. You can then spend those skill points on the skill trees for both Emma and Ku, increasing their overall effectiveness and giving them new moves to use in combat via arts and finishers, as well as a whole bunch of passive effects like turning your ranged weaponry into just monstrosities of piercing, tracking, almost chain lightning-esque projectiles that just destroy everything, or making Ku more useful in combat to aid you, that kind of stuff. Now I mentioned there was some equipment, so for Emma this basically means you will eventually get a crossbow and a bow. Those have a bunch of different ammunition types. You also have a very linear, I would say, gear progression where you can put on different armor sets that increase your defense and everything, but that was, again, just super linear. It doesn't change your appearance or anything like that, it just increases your stats as you go and find them. Ku, on the other hand, has some different stuff, so as you defeat like elite enemies and things, you can get extra skills. Ku can research these and learn to use them permanently, and then you can equip those onto Ku. These will be like just passive things he does on his own, and then in addition to that, you can also assign him a bunch of like finishers and stuff to use from a menu, sort of Pokemon style mid-combat. And Ku in particular, and the way that works is where I feel like the game kind of shows off some of Game Freak's Pokemon origins in some ways. Beyond that, Emma also gets these little Spirit Stone things that will have a variety of different effects or just stat increases that you can slot onto her, and Ku gets like charm bracelet things he can wear to give you a little bit of stat boost there. Other bits of progression, however, come from cooking as well as progressing your hub. So, cooking is something your friend who accompanies you on the journey, Kagura, will be doing for you throughout the journey, and the first time you eat those various foods, you can get massive bonuses to your stats if you actually make an attempt to do all of this, so don't neglect the cooking. And then last but not least, you can upgrade your mobile base. This is done by finding the upgrade parts by exploring the world and bringing them back. Once you do this, you'll be able to upgrade the facilities on the mobile base, which gives you access to a ton of resources, including the ability to properly upgrade your blades. So, one of the things Emma can equip is a bunch of different swords. Each of those swords has a different effect that is activated by doing a perfect parry. You can increase both the damage as well as the effect of that ability by of course, upgrading the weaponry itself, which is also true for technically your ranged weaponry, like your bolts and stuff. You can make those stronger as well via that same method. But that's most of what you're looking at progression-wise. Although I do want to mention one last thing here before we move on, which is that the vast majority of that is done via amber, which is what you'll pick up by defeating enemies. But the thing is, you don't lose that when you die or anything. Once you have it, you have it. With that grinding spot that I mentioned that I found, I was able to just kind of quickly grind through all of this, which is important because another thing is that the research for both the recipes you can cook as well as Ku's research on his items advance by you killing enemies. Like each time you kill an enemy, that time advances on those things. And so grinding resources not only gives you the resources and the level ups, etc., but it also increases the time on that research, which makes it go by faster as well. So there's a lot of like little bits of progression tied up in there, but it's not anything super complicated. Which brings us then to the gameplay and world section. So this is honestly where I was the most excited and the most let down by the game. One of the things that really struck me about this game ahead of its release was its art direction. A lot of it has like this incredibly wild, untamed wilderness beset by like ruins and stuff, and clearly it's been a long time since the fall of civilization. And while that works for the first couple of areas, yes, the bummer is that once you've seen those first couple of areas, you've seen most of the environments. They don't really change it up too much there, biome-wise. Like there's one area that is like a wasteland, and then there's like a city you get to walk through towards the very end. But beyond that, it all just kind of looks the same, and that was a real bummer as far as the actual world itself is concerned. Looking beyond that, however, each chapter of the game, more or less, is divided up into an explorable zone, and when you kill the boss of a given area, you will then advance to the next zone, and you can travel back and forth between them via fast travel, usually going to a various campsite around the way. So campsites are where you're going to do your standard stuff in games like these, which is rest, which respawns your enemies, as well as do all your leveling up, etc. It'll also give you notifications at some point if you should head back to your mobile base, which ends the day, so you'll cook, eat, and then the new day starts. And that'll also give you opportunities to have conversations with Ku, as well as Kagura and the other people with you along for the ride, which gives you an opportunity to increase your rapport with them, which gives you extra little bonuses usually tied to progression. Beyond that basic setup, it's really just kind of you going through, fighting all the enemies in your way, gathering up resources, finding campsites, documents, progression, just like pulling up the manuals for various things, which lets you craft and refresh them every time you rest, for example, doing the occasional bit of side quest, fighting the elite enemies, finding gear, just various ways to reward your exploration and exploring the given areas you find yourself in. Now, some of these areas are bigger and better than others, frankly. Some of them are more explorable, like the first area you're in, where it's kind of just a big area you get dumped into and can explore outside of the main objective, whereas others are much, much more linear. Now, in order to facilitate some of that exploration, you do have a variety of ways to get around, which is actually going to use Emma's hair technically. So you get like what is in effect a grappling hook, which allows you to jump around, but it's Emma's hair, which turns into like vines, which is allowing you to do this. You can also use those vines to extend like a walkway from an area to give you farther bits of jump. When you jump, if you press and hold it, you'll get not exactly a double jump, but like a little elevator lift via these vines that lift you up out of the ground. And it takes a little getting used to, but once you do, I actually did enjoy the way movement worked and kind of moving around the given areas, finding the secrets, that kind of stuff. That's one of those things that kind of grew on me, not unlike those vines, throughout the entirety of the experience. Another thing you'll do is occasionally find things like lockboxes or seedlings. The seedlings you can take back to your home base and grow your own food for your cooking recipes. The lockboxes come in a few different varieties. Some are unlocked, some are locked. There is a mini game lock where you just have to like push a correct sequence of directional keys. And then there are code locked ones where you get the code by going and typically killing an elite enemy nearby, which then gives you the code. And you can also find dragon shrines. So we do have a basic healing item, as you would probably expect for most games like this, and the dragon shrines are what give you more of it. So this particular bit of progression is tied specifically to exploration because there are 40 of these shrines to find, and for every 10 of them you find, you get an extra charge of your healing. I will say by the end of the game, I was a little underwhelmed with how much healing these provided, and I wound up using primarily abilities, typically from Ku, which can be modded a little bit to provide healing as a more effective way of restoring my health. So there was that. Now, beyond that stuff, there is a little bit of like lore tied to everything. For instance, a lot of what we are fighting are actually golems, and these golems are human, actually. So golems are one of the ways it seems they tried to escape the apocalypse. They would take human souls and transfer them into these golems, but the bummer there is that devoid of their body, this could eventually turn them crazy, and they become corrupted, and just kind of another threat at that point that you have to fight your way through, on top of all the malefacts. So if you want to dig into like some interesting lore and things, find some notes, there's a little bit of that, but it doesn't go too crazy. Most of that is tied up in the actual main story. That then brings us to combat, however, a very big part of a game like this. And while you could, I suppose, easily describe this game as a Souls-like, I don't think it quite tells you the whole story when you do that, because it mixes that formula up in some important ways. But nonetheless, I should probably mention the big focus on parrying. You've probably seen it in the gameplay footage, as well as me mentioning it a little bit with your weapon effects. Parrying, and perfect parrying in particular, is a really big deal here. You can get through the game without it, but it would be a worse experience, to be honest. And the reason for that is that in lieu of a stamina bar, we have this like charge bar at the bottom of the screen during combat, those little like flower charge pedal things. And those are really important because you are going to use those to activate your finishers and your bloom arts from your skill tree. However, the way you earn those charges is by attacking enemies, typically. It will build up. But guarding, or getting hit, decreases it. However, doing a perfect parry not only gives you a full charge of that meter, but it will also do is activate the effect on your chosen weapon that you are using. So say giving you elemental status buffs, that kind of thing. And so ideally what you want to do is learn enemy movesets, perfectly parry that moveset, then use the charges you get from that to activate your big follow-up attacks, which at the same time also charges up Ku, so he can use his abilities at the same time, which can provide other effects. And like the core, I would say, focus of the combat system is mixing and matching those in fun ways. And while it can also take a little getting used to, once you master that, it does get really rewarding. I will say personally, I didn't love the exact timing on some of the parrying, and I feel they could stand to loosen that up a little bit, but it's not like the game is so hard, as I mentioned, for it to like be a complete showstopper that they haven't done that. I just think it would feel a little better personally. Now, those aren't your only options. You can use your ranged weaponry. You can also go into stealth mode. There's some skills that lean into that, but stealth is not like a 100% viable option. But it will allow you to do things like sneak attack kills, which can be especially helpful to get over that initial difficulty hurdle in the beginning of the game once you get started. Now, really, the mastery of combat is, again, just weaving all of that stuff together in the moment in a way that can feel really rewarding once you master it. I will say, once you've beaten the game once, regardless of the difficulty, you unlock some really, really crazy strong skills for New Game Plus, which combined with the fact that they don't increase enemy health, it seems like, means you can just obliterate stuff. You get these just like massive AoE explosions that are relatively cheap to use, and they are incredibly deadly. Like, they do so much damage. And you can kind of trivialize the game via those, especially if you're willing to grind out some upgrades. But overall, I would say the combat is fun if you're into that type of game, but if you're not into it and you don't like parry-based stuff, you're probably going to struggle with this one. However, before I move on, there is one other thing I want to talk about, and that was the enemy repetition that I mentioned. So while this does extend to the basic enemies as well, the part that really bothers me the most is it extends to bosses a lot of the time as well. They reuse the same boss fight over and over and over again. There's only like 3 bosses, I think, that you only fight a single time. It gets old. And to top that off, if it wasn't enough, almost every boss has a second phase. They explain that second phase via a narrative device. As these malefacts get weaker, they actually draw more blight to them, which then kind of brings in the second health bar phase of the fight. And that also gets old. So not only am I fighting the same bosses over and over again, but every time you do that, for the most part, they then have like that second health bar thing that feels a little overdone because of how much they use it. And when you combine that with a story that takes too long to honestly start paying off, what you're left with is a game that can feel really, really repetitive not that far into it, by like the 3rd or 4th area. So the combat system itself is enjoyable, but unfortunately, due to a lot of that repetition, I don't feel like you wind up getting the best experience because you just keep fighting the same stuff over and over again. Now, that brings me to the Steam Deck, and more recently, the new Steam Machine section, now that I've got one of those as well, but that doesn't really matter in the case of this game. This is slightly interesting. my experience was the same on both of those devices, the Steam Deck and the Steam Machine, which is that I couldn't play it at all. It would just give me an infinite black loading screen whenever I would try to start the game, and it would just wouldn't play after that. Interestingly enough, the official rating is unsupported for Steam Deck, but verified for the Steam Machine. But again, I couldn't get it to work on either of these devices. I did try a few different versions of Proton, and none of them were working for me, but it's possible that someone will mess around with it more and find a version that works. But I will say, like, out of the box, just trying to start it up and then trying a few different Proton versions, I couldn't get it to work at all. So I guess we'll see what happens, but that was my experience with it for you. Next up, we got positives, negatives, and then we'll wrap this thing up. So on the positive side of things, we've got the combat system itself, traversal, and eventually the story gets pretty interesting. I was invested by the end of it, but it does take too long to get there. The combat, again, pretty enjoyable overall. I think if they were to take that combat system and honestly just give you more stuff to fight with it and more interesting ways to use a lot of those abilities, they could be onto something there. But in this specific instance, in this game, I do think the repetition gets to be a bit much. It's also incredibly fun to move around. It's another thing where it kind of grew on me a little bit, which is perhaps fitting given the nature of the vines and everything assisting you with said traversal, but moving around the map and kind of learning how to do that efficiently got to be a really enjoyable experience for me at the very least. But as you could probably already guess with the negatives, there is the repetition that I've been harping on, both in terms of the enemies as well as the environments themselves. I had a ton of issues with crashing personally, and while that wasn't game-breaking, it got really old. And of course, the story that takes entirely too long to get where it's going. Which then brings me to my conclusion. Honestly, this one's a buy on sale for me. I didn't pay for it because of the review key, but if I had bought this game, I do not feel like I would have gotten my $60 out of it, as that is, in fact, the base price of the game, $60 US. There is a deluxe version that is $70. It looks to just have some skins and extra items to help you out with progression by the looks of it, but nothing too crazy, nothing worth $10 anyway. But mostly I would just say this game is fine. Like, it's not bad or anything. The crashing was annoying, but I don't know how widespread that problem is. The rest of it was just okay, though. I enjoyed combat, but it's hardly the first game with enjoyable combat that I've ever played, and that's really the best thing it has going for it. But a lot of the other elements of the game are just alright. They're probably not going to wow you, and with everything else coming up on the horizon here in about a month or two, I think people are going to have a hard time justifying a full $60 spend on this particular title when, for the most part, it's just okay. And so for that reason, ultimately, I've got to give this one a buy on sale. I think this is the kind of game people will probably pick up during something like the winter sale here come December and have an enjoyable enough time with. But right as of this moment, I don't think it quite lives up to the asking price, which is why it gets the buy on sale. But as for today, that is pretty much going to do it. If you've been playing this one, since it has technically already released by the time this video is out, or if you are planning to, I'd love to know what you think about it down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.